My name is Delaney Pierce. I'm 31 years old, and the moment I finally understood my place in my family was not the night my sister got arrested. It was 2 weeks later when I was the one who needed help, and my parents made it clear, in the coldest possible way, that I was on my own. By then, though, I should have seen it coming. The arrest had already told me everything. I was just too used to being useful to admit what it meant. It happened on a Thursday night, close to midnight, when my dad called and told me to come over right away because there was a problem with the bank transfer, and they needed me to fix it. He didn't sound panicked exactly. He sounded irritated, like technology itself had chosen the worst possible time to inconvenience him. So I drove out to their house in Marietta, still in my work clothes, hair twisted up, laptop in my passenger seat, expecting another routine mess with passwords or verification codes. That was my role in the family. If something needed to be figured out, I was the one they called. If a bill had to be paid, an account had to be unlocked, or a form had to be filled out correctly the first time, I handled it. By the time I walked into their kitchen, I knew something was different. My mother was pacing. My father had both hands flat on the counter. Nobody offered me water. Nobody even said hi. My dad just turned the laptop toward me and said, "Get into the Chase account. We need to move the money tonight." I asked how much, and that was when I saw the number. It was almost everything they had set aside. Their emergency fund, their savings, money that was supposed to last them through retirement. I looked up at him and said, "What happened?" He glanced toward the hallway and lowered his voice like the walls were listening. "Your sister got arrested. We need to get her out before morning." I remember staring at the screen while my mother whispered from the next room that if they pulled the rest from the IRA, they could cover the attorney too. I remember entering the codes, clicking through the transfer, and feeling this strange, hollow stillness settle over me. They were willing to drain everything for her without a second thought. No debate, no hesitation, no lecture about responsibility, just action. My father barely looked at me once it was done. He said, "You can head home now," like I was an employee staying late after a shift. I sat in my car for a full minute before turning the key, staring at their front lawn and thinking about how many years I had spent being the dependable daughter, the easy daughter, the one who solved problems without ever becoming one. 2 weeks later, when I told them I needed help covering the deductible for my gallbladder surgery, my father went silent and then said, "Flat as winter. You're not a priority right now. Figure it out yourself." My mother, right there in the background, added that my sister needed them more and that I was strong enough to handle it. I laughed because the alternative was breaking apart, and I said, "Thanks for showing me exactly where I stand." That was the moment everything changed. Because once you hear something like that out loud, really hear it, you can never go back to pretending you belong where you were only ever being used. And what my family still didn't understand that night was that the one person they had just dismissed was the same person quietly holding half their life together. So if you think this is just another story about family drama, stay with me. Because what happened after I stopped saving them was a whole lot worse than anything they ever imagined. I barely slept after that call. Not because of the surgery itself, but because of how casually they had said it. "You're not a priority right now. Figure it out yourself." My father had delivered the sentence like he was canceling lunch plans, not telling his own daughter that her health came second to whatever disaster my sister had created this time. My mother didn't soften it. She made it worse. She said my sister needed them more, like that explained everything. Like being the child who caused the most damage automatically entitled you to the most love. I kept hearing those words in my head while I lay awake in bed with a heating pad pressed against my side, staring at the ceiling of my apartment and finally letting myself admit something I had spent years trying not to name. This was not a one-time thing. This was the truth of my family, spoken out loud. My sister got rescued. I got judged on how quietly I could survive. The next morning, I called the hospital billing office on my lunch break and asked what my options were. The woman on the phone was kind, professional, and matter of fact in a way I appreciated. She walked me through the deductible, the payment timeline, and the financing choices. I took out a short-term personal loan that made my stomach knot up almost as much as the pain under my ribs, but at least it was clear. At least the bank didn't pretend to love me while leaving me stranded. I scheduled the surgery, updated my manager, and arranged to work ahead on as much as I could before recovery. Every step I took without them made something inside me colder and steadier. I stopped expecting a text that said they were sorry. I stopped looking at my phone hoping one of them had come to their senses. Instead, the messages that came in were exactly the kind I should have expected. My mother texted 3 days later asking if I could help reset the password on the electric company account because the verification code kept going to the wrong email. My father followed that with a message asking if I had time to look over a letter from the insurance company because he didn't understand whether it needed a response. The day after that, my sister texted me for the first time since the arrest. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't apologize for the chaos her mess had caused. She sent one sentence: "Don't make things harder for Mom and Dad right now." I stared at that message for a long time before I laughed out loud in my kitchen. Harder. That was the word she chose, as if I had done something cruel by asking for help with surgery after watching our parents empty their savings to save her. As if my pain was bad timing, as if my only moral duty in this family was to remain useful, quiet, and convenient. I didn't answer her. I didn't answer any of them. For the first time in my adult life, I let every message sit there unread or unanswered until the screen went dark again. And in that silence, memories started lining up in my head with a clarity that made me sick. I remembered being 19 and helping my parents dispute a credit card charge because my sister had borrowed the card and conveniently forgotten where the money went. I remembered spending a Saturday at the DMV because my mother said I was better at dealing with paperwork. I remembered fixing their tax portal login, comparing prescription plans during open enrollment, explaining late fees, setting reminders for property taxes, and linking my own checking account one winter when my father said he was short for just a few days. I remembered Christmas mornings where my sister got forgiven and I got thanked. I remembered every time they called me mature when what they really meant was easy to neglect. The more I thought about it, the more humiliating it felt. I had spent years mistaking dependence for trust. They did not value me because they loved me more deeply. They valued me because I was efficient. I made their lives run smoother. I solved things before they became emergencies. I absorbed inconvenience before it reached them. And the moment I needed something back, even something temporary, I became a burden they felt entitled to dismiss. A week before my surgery, my friend Candace came by with soup and electrolyte packets and found me sitting at my table with a stack of medical forms on one side and my phone face down on the other. She asked if I'd heard from my parents and I told her the truth. Not really. Just requests. She gave me that look people give when they still want to believe your family means well. "Maybe they're overwhelmed," she said carefully. "Maybe they just think you've always got things handled." I nodded because I knew she was trying to comfort me, but that was exactly the problem. They did think I had things handled. They had built their entire relationship with me around that assumption. No one checks the load-bearing wall until it cracks. On the morning of my surgery, I drove myself to the hospital before sunrise with a small overnight bag in the passenger seat and a knot in my chest that had nothing to do with anesthesia. I signed my own forms. I listed Candace as my emergency contact. I paid what I could at the front desk and told myself not to look at my phone again. But while I was sitting there in that thin hospital gown under fluorescent lights, I checked anyway. There was a voicemail from my father asking if I could call him back when I had a chance because he was having trouble accessing a payment portal and something important was due that afternoon. No mention of my procedure. No good luck. No. Are you okay? Just another problem for me to solve. Something inside me went completely still then. Not shattered. Not broken. Just still. Clean. Final. I set the phone down, leaned back in that uncomfortable chair, and understood with absolute certainty that if I kept being available to them after this, I would deserve the life it created. When I woke up after surgery, groggy and sore and dry-mouthed, Candace was there beside my bed. My parents were not. My sister was not. There was no bouquet, no missed call asking how it went, no message saying they were thinking of me. By that evening, my mother had texted to ask whether I happened to remember the login for their car insurance portal because the payment page looked different now. I read that text twice, then locked my phone and turned it face down on the blanket. That was the moment the sadness started burning off. In its place came something sharper. I was done asking to matter. I was done translating neglect into stress, cruelty into bad timing, favoritism into family complexity. They had made their choice with perfect clarity. Now I was going to make mine. Recovery gave me too much time to think, and for once, that was exactly what I needed. Sitting alone in my apartment, sore and exhausted, I finally saw how much of my parents' lives had been running through me for years. It was never one big favor. It was 100 little things that added up. Bills, passwords, renewals, insurance questions, payment reminders, account alerts, customer service calls. I had become the person who kept everything in their world moving, and I had done it so long that they no longer treated it like help. They treated it like my job. So I made a list. I went through old emails, texts, and saved logins, and wrote down every account, every payment, and every service that still had my information attached to it. The list was longer than I wanted to admit. The mortgage portal, utility accounts, insurance payments, registration alerts, tax paperwork, and even a couple of credit cards. That was when I realized just how deeply I had been built into their lives. I started with the simplest step. Anything connected to my money had to go. I removed my checking account from every automatic payment I had set up for them. I took my email and phone number off the recovery settings wherever I could. I logged out of their portals on my devices and stopped being the person they called every time something stopped working. I was careful not to damage anything. I wasn't trying to sabotage them. I was just removing myself from responsibilities that never should have belonged to me in the first place. The texts kept coming anyway. My mother asked if I could explain a higher utility bill. My father wanted help with a registration notice. My sister texted once to tell me not to make things harder for everyone. I ignored all of it. Then, about 3 weeks after my surgery, my mother left me a frantic voicemail saying the mortgage payment had not gone through and she couldn't get into the bank app. My father called right after, demanding to know what had happened and how to fix it. I let both calls go unanswered. More messages followed. A late fee here, an insurance problem there. Error screens, screenshots, missed payments. Every message carried the same assumption underneath it. Delaney will fix this. Delaney always fixes this. But this time, I didn't. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. Because once I stopped holding everything together for them, the cracks started showing almost immediately. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The first time my father showed up at my apartment unannounced, he pounded on the door like he was trying to break through it before I could pretend not to be home. I had just gotten back to work that week, and I was standing in my kitchen reheating soup when the knocking started. It was so loud and aggressive that for a second I thought something terrible had happened. Then I looked through the peephole and saw him standing there with his jaw clenched, one hand on his hip, already angry before I had even opened the door. I kept the chain on and pulled it open just enough to look at him. He did not ask how I was feeling. He did not ask how recovery had gone. He went straight to the point. He said I was being ridiculous, childish, selfish, and that whatever little message I was trying to send had gone far enough. I just stood there and listened until he finally stopped long enough for me to say, "You told me to figure it out myself. So I did. Now you get to do the same." His face changed when I said that. Not with guilt, with offense. Like I had broken some unspoken rule by repeating his own words back to him. He lowered his voice and said my sister's situation was different. She was fragile. She was overwhelmed. She needed more support right now. I said, "Then you should probably be helping her instead of banging on my door." He stared at me for a second like he didn't recognize me anymore. Maybe he didn't. The version of me he knew would have folded by then. She would have sighed, stepped aside, opened her laptop, and fixed whatever mess he brought with him. But that version of me had been carved out of years of guilt and habit, and I was done living as someone else's emergency contact. He left angry, muttering that I would regret this and that families should not treat each other this way. I almost laughed after he said it, because that was exactly the point. Families should not treat each other this way. Yet somehow that principle had only become important once I stopped being useful. After he left, the messages got worse. My mother started texting me in that wounded, trembling tone she used whenever she wanted sympathy to do the work that accountability never could. She said the bank account had been flagged after too many failed login attempts. She said one of the credit cards had been declined at the grocery store. She said, "Your father is under so much stress right now. Please stop punishing us." I read every message and answered none of them. A few days later, my sister finally decided to reappear. Not in person, of course, just through text, like always, dropping into the wreckage without taking responsibility for any of it. She told me I was making everything worse. She said Mom was crying every day and Dad wasn't sleeping. She said I needed to stop acting bitter over one conversation and remember that this family had always been there for me. That last part actually made me put my phone down and laugh out loud. Always been there for me. I thought about the surgery, the loan, the empty hospital room, and the silence afterward. I thought about how quickly they had mobilized for her and how easily they had dismissed me. Then I blocked her number. That was the easiest decision I had made in weeks. By the end of that month, the consequences were no longer small enough for them to ignore. The mortgage company had sent a warning letter. One of their utility accounts was behind. Their auto insurance payment had lapsed because they had missed the notice and failed to update the card on file. My mother called twice from an unknown number and left me voicemails that sounded less offended now and more frightened. She kept saying they were trying, but everything was piling up too fast. That was the first honest thing anyone had said to me in weeks. Everything was piling up too fast. That was exactly how I had lived for years, carrying one more responsibility, one more task, one more crisis they didn't want to handle themselves. The difference was that when it happened to me, I was told to be strong. When it happened to them, it was suddenly an emergency. And the most unbelievable part was that the person they had emptied themselves out to save was already disappearing. My sister had moved out of Georgia and gone to stay with a friend in Florida, while everything back home kept falling apart. She barely answered them. She had no money to offer, no solutions, no sudden burst of loyalty. They had drained their savings, wrecked their stability, and pushed me away for her. And now she was gone. That detail mattered more than anything because it stripped away every excuse they had been hiding behind. This was never about fairness or compassion. It was favoritism, pure and simple, and now they were finally stuck living inside the consequences of it. That was when my inbox started filling up with the same message from both of my parents, over and over again. "Please just talk to us once." Not, "We're sorry." Not, "How are you feeling?" Not, "We were wrong." Just, please talk to us. Because even then, they still believed one conversation could put me back in place. Like I was a loose wire they just needed to reconnect before the whole house went dark. But by then, the power had already gone out, and for the first time, I had no intention of turning it back on. By the next month, my mother stopped pretending text messages were enough and started showing up at my building in person. The first time, she was standing in the lobby holding a manila folder against her chest like it was evidence in a trial. When I walked in from work, she rushed toward me with red eyes and said she just needed 5 minutes. I should have kept walking, but I stopped long enough to hear what she thought was finally serious enough to move me. She started pulling papers out of the folder one by one. A late mortgage notice, a past due property tax letter, a warning about their car insurance. She kept thrusting them toward me like I was supposed to take them, sort them, and make the problem disappear the way I always had. Her voice was shaking when she said everything was happening at once and she did not know where to start. I looked at the stack in her hands and felt something cold settle over me. For years, that had been my place in the family. I was the starting point. I was the one who turned chaos into order and panic into a checklist. But standing there in that lobby, watching her hold out the consequences of her own choices like they were somehow mine to carry, I finally understood how deeply they had confused dependence with love. I told her, as calmly as I could, that she and my father had made it very clear who mattered when things got hard. Then I said, "You chose who to save first. Now you get to live with that choice." She stared at me like I had slapped her. Then she started crying harder. Not soft tears either, but angry, humiliated tears that drew the attention of two people waiting by the elevator. She said I was being cruel. She said this was not who she raised. She said families do not abandon each other. That last line almost stopped me in my tracks, because the irony of hearing it from her was so sharp it felt unreal. I leaned in just enough to keep my voice low and said, "You abandoned me first." Then I walked past her and left her standing there with the folder in her hands. After that, the pressure changed. It was no longer just about bills or missed payments. It became a campaign. My Aunt Denise in Ohio called and left me a long voicemail about how my parents were in bad shape and how whatever had happened, I needed to remember they were still family. An old college friend texted asking if everything was okay at home because my mother had reached out saying she was worried about me. That one actually made me laugh. Worried about me. She had not worried when I was sitting alone in a hospital bed, but now that her mortgage was late and the insurance had lapsed, suddenly I was the concern. My father even emailed me once from a new address because I had stopped responding everywhere else. The message was short, clipped, almost offended. He said I needed to stop this childish behavior before real damage was done. That was the closest he had come to honesty. Real damage was being done, just not to the person he thought mattered least. The truth was, once I stopped holding their lives together, things were unraveling faster than even I had expected. They had never learned the systems because I had always been the system. My mother did not know which notices were urgent and which ones could wait. My father had no patience for online portals, phone trees, or account verification. They had spent years living inside a structure I quietly maintained, and now they were discovering what it looked like without me. Around that same time, I drove to their house while I knew they would be out and collected the last of my things from the hall closet and the guest room. A winter coat, a box of childhood photos, 2 old books, a lamp I had bought myself when I was 23. The house felt strange without anyone in it. Too quiet, too clean, like a place that had already started forgetting me. I did not leave a note. I did not make a scene. I just took what was mine and closed the door behind me for what I suspected would be the last time. On the drive home, I realized I did not feel heartbroken. I felt finished. That weekend, my mother left 3 voicemails in a row, each one more frantic than the last. The first was about the county tax office. The second was about the insurance company asking for updated payment information. The third was just her crying and saying she did not understand why I was doing this to them. I listened to all three while sitting on my couch with takeout in my lap and my phone on speaker. The old version of me would have called back before the second voicemail ended. She would have opened her laptop, made a list, solved the immediate problem, and told herself she could be angry later. But that version of me had almost let these people teach her that love was something you earned through usefulness. I was not going back to that. The final shift came when I got a copy of a notice that had still been linked to my email from months earlier. It was another warning tied to the house, more serious than the last ones, full of deadlines and consequences and language that made it clear this was no longer just a rough patch. They were heading towards something they could not talk their way out of. I sat there staring at the screen, thinking about the night they emptied their savings to save my sister, and how certain they had been that I would always be there to catch whatever came after. They had bet everything on the wrong child, and still expected the right one to clean up the loss. That was the part that stayed with me. Not the money, not even the surgery. It was the entitlement. The absolute faith that no matter how little I was valued, I would still come back when the structure started collapsing. But I didn't. And deep down, I think that was the first moment they truly understood that this was not a fight, not a phase, and not a lesson they could wait out. I was really gone. By the fourth month, everything shifted from anger to panic. My parents were no longer acting offended. They were scared. The missed payments had turned into serious warning letters, and the mortgage was now in real trouble. My father sent me a short email with one subject line: "Please." Inside he wrote, "We were wrong. We need you." It was the closest thing to an apology I had seen, but even then, it still felt incomplete. There was no mention of my surgery, no real acknowledgement of what they had said to me, and no understanding of how long they had treated me like the backup plan. It was not really an apology. It was desperation. My mother started texting me the same line every morning: "Please, just talk to us once." Over and over, like repetition could somehow bring the old me back. But the old me was gone. Around that same time, I finally handled the last financial tie between us. The joint credit card still had my name on it, and I refused to let their mess damage my credit. So I paid off the remaining balance myself and closed the account for good. It irritated me to spend another dollar cleaning up after them, but I wanted every door between us shut. What made it worse was my sister. While my parents were scrambling, she was nowhere to be found. Then one day I saw photos of her in Miami, smiling at some beach bar like none of this had anything to do with her. My parents had emptied their savings to save her, pushed me aside for her, and now she was living like nothing had happened. That was when the last bit of sympathy I had left disappeared. By then, I was healing, back at work, and finally building my own life without their constant chaos in it. My bills were paid. My apartment was peaceful. My savings were growing again. Then my aunt called and told me my parents were talking about selling the house before things got even worse. Maybe a short sale if they could manage it in time. I sat there in silence after that call, because by then it did not even feel shocking. It felt inevitable. They had drained their retirement, ignored problems they did not know how to handle, and built their stability around the daughter they treated like free labor. This was not bad luck. It was the result of their choices. That night, my father sent another email. This time, one line stood out more than anything else: "We did not think you would really walk away." I stared at that sentence for a long time, because that was the truth they had never admitted before. They thought I would take anything as long as they called it family. They thought I would always come back, always fix it, always save them from the consequences of their own decisions. But they were wrong. They had already told me exactly where I stood. Now they were the ones left standing there alone. By the 6th month, the house was officially on the market. Not because my parents wanted a fresh start, and not because they had some grand plan to downsize. They were out of options. The mortgage had fallen too far behind, the late fees had piled up, the savings were gone, and their credit was damaged badly enough that even the realtor they found had been blunt with them. If they wanted to avoid losing everything in a foreclosure, they needed to sell fast and take whatever they could get. The same house they had guarded so fiercely for years, the one with the perfect lawn and the polished entryway, and all the pride that came with it, was now reduced to listing photos and price cuts. When my aunt told me they had moved into a cramped 2-bedroom rental on the edge of town, I just sat there and let the silence settle. I thought I would feel triumph. What I actually felt was something colder and cleaner than that. Finality. Because by then, there was nothing left to argue about. The consequences had already spoken for me. My father stopped sounding angry after they moved. He sounded old. My mother's texts kept coming every morning, always some version of the same plea. Please just talk to us once. Please give us one chance. Please do not do this forever. But the truth was, I had not done this to them. They had done it themselves the moment they decided my sister's crisis mattered and my pain did not. They had chosen who to save. The only difference now was that they no longer had me standing in the background to absorb the cost. And my sister, the center of all of it, the reason they drained their retirement and shattered what little stability they had left, paid her own kind of price too. Not the quick kind, not the dramatic kind, the lasting kind. Once the money was gone and my parents had nothing left to give, she disappeared completely. No more emotional speeches, no more family loyalty, no more promises to do better. The calls stopped because she stopped answering. The woman they had sacrificed everything for did not come back to help with rent, did not offer $1 toward the move, did not lift a finger when they packed up the house they nearly lost trying to protect her. She took what she needed and walked away. And in the end, that was the most expensive punishment of all. My parents lost their savings, their house, their peace, and finally the illusion they had built their whole family around. They had spent years treating me like the spare and her like the investment, and when the bill came due, their favorite child turned out to be worthless. That truth hit them harder than any late notice ever could. As for me, I healed. Really healed. I paid off my surgery loan ahead of schedule. I went back to work, earned a promotion, and started building savings that belonged only to me. My apartment felt peaceful in a way home never had. No sudden calls. No emergencies that were never mine until someone decided they were. No guilt dressed up as love. Just quiet, routine, and the strange relief of finally living a life that did not depend on being needed by people who never truly valued me. Every now and then, I still see my phone light up with my mother's name. Sometimes I delete the message without opening it. Sometimes I read the first line and set the phone back down. It is always the same. Please just talk to us once. But I never answer, because they already had their chance to talk to me when I needed them most. And they used that moment to show me exactly who I was to them. I believe them. That was the part they never expected. They thought I would bend. That time would soften me. That family would be enough to pull me back into place. They were wrong. I was not their backup plan anymore. I was not their emergency contact. Their fixer. Their quiet little insurance policy against consequences. I was just gone. And that, more than anything, was the price they were never prepared to pay. If there is any lesson in this, it is one I learned too late, but will never forget. Being the responsible one does not mean you were born to carry everyone else's failures. Love without respect turns into exploitation faster than most people want to admit. and sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is let people feel the full weight of the choices they made while counting on you to save them from it. Blood does not make loyalty automatic. Real family does not only love your strength, real family respects your pain, your limits, and your right to stop bleeding for people who would not bandage you back. So if you have ever been the one everybody leaned on while pretending you needed nothing in return, remember this. The moment you choose yourself is not cruelty. It is the moment the truth finally has somewhere to stand. At Revenge Argon, our team is committed to creating meaningful and engaging stories that entertain while also delivering thoughtful lessons. We want to make it clear that this is a fictional story, created to share educational values, life insights, and useful reflections with our audience. The female lead handled the situation with strength, clarity, and self-respect. Instead of begging for love or fairness, she chose to protect her peace and let others face the consequences of their own choices. If you were in her position, would you have walked away like she did? Or would you have given your family one more chance?